It's been no secret recently that anime and manga have been completely taking over. Currently, manga is selling better than American-made comics in America, and of course the wide-known success of the Demon Slayer movie. Japan, over the many years, has built up a reliable audience that has remained very loyal, while as American comics and cartoons over time have been losing that trust between them and their audience, and therefore losing their audience altogether. There's a lot of reasons for why this is, but of course a lot of people, when they cite their reasons, will list first and foremost stories. A lot of people will bluntly say that manga is just simply written better than a lot of American comics, therefore they would rather read manga than pick up something made in America. It's true to some extent. I think that rather than written better, in a lot of cases, it's just written less generic. And of course, this can be linked to cultural reasons. What's popular in America might not be as popular in Japan, and so forth. So if you were looking for something different, it would make sense to look for what other countries are making, rather than just seeing the same old thing that your country has been making for the past few years. But even more so, I think American comics and cartoons have been way more scared of taking risks. And when I say risk, I don't mean taking the risk of upsetting your current audience, but rather the risk of being weird, being a little off the wall and maybe edgy at times, despite the fact that that may not appeal to the wider audience. You can argue the same thing of movies. A lot of movies these days follow a very specific formula because they know that formula works, and it has been working for a long time. The problem is that will make movies over time very predictable, and when writers have less creative control, they put a lot less passion into what they're making. And then of course there's politics, and I'm sure you guys all know about these politics. There's certain expectations for a lot of media we consume to have certain check boxes marked off. Writers are now expected to have some sort of political commentary. They're expected to have an extremely diverse cast of characters, regardless of whether or not it makes sense. And like I said before, when writers have less creative control, they put a lot less passion into it. There's definitely a lot of reason behind why American stories can feel more generic, more boring, while as when you pick stuff up from Japan, it's a little more off the wall, it's edgy, it's different. And then you look at the two main comic publishers, Marvel, DC. They're locked into a closet of only superhero stories, and only superhero stories that take place within a specific universe. Now, there's still a lot of stories that they could tell within those specific universes, but once again, they have the fear of taking risks by making something new within that universe. And if they do make something new, they have to keep it somewhat related to something in the past that is already sold. So you can't just get a new character, you have to get a new Shazam, or you have to get a new Superman. They can't have their own name because we have to work off of what we've already created. But disregarding Marvel and DC, we do have independent comics that will take place in a bunch of random universes where they don't have those same restrictions. But even if they don't have restrictions placed on them by a company, they do have some restriction placed on them in the current climate of society. Oh, God forbid we create something that offends someone. So even independent writers will sometimes make their stories more generic, more safe, as opposed to actually using that creativity of theirs. Manga, as we all know it, has been very freestyle. An idea hits an artist, they make one chapter of it, they get it published in the magazine, and if it's popular, they get a whole series made out of it. And if that series is popular, they get a TV show made out of it. And if that TV show is popular, they get their own movies. And for a long time, this formula has actually worked pretty well. It's very cross-promotional. People who like the anime will want to buy the manga. People who like the manga will want to buy the light novel or the merchandise. People who like the movie will watch the anime and then read the manga. It's all connected to each other in a way to make money in a in a full circle. And don't misinterpret anything that I'm saying here. American comics have tried this too, but they've taken a lot less risks in these shows and these movies because of a little this. And that's really one of the biggest edges that Japan has over America. All that manga, all that animation they're producing, it is so much cheaper. And because of this also creates a lot of controversy in a lot of anime and manga that we see and read, because people know that the people working on it are not necessarily being treated well or paid the correct amount that they should be paid. In fact, some people aren't paid at all, especially those assistants who are just working as an intern. But this is the biggest reason why Japan is able to make so much content. And Japan is willing to invest that money into these different manga series, different magazines, different TV shows and movies, because even if it doesn't turn out to be successful, that's not that much of a loss for them. They can always make it up with this other manga that was successful. But that's the big thing. A lot of animators don't really get paid that much. Some of them can't even afford their own apartment. What ends up happening is that the studio will actually give them an apartment to all live in and then pay them a lower salary. Or well, actually, they don't. Do they do salaries? I think they pay them per frame. I guess it depends on where you're working at, but the more popular the anime and manga become, the more demand there is to create even more content. So now they're actually outsourcing to places like Korea to get even cheaper animation. And America's not too far behind. They outsource to other countries for animation as well. But a lot of animation is done here, and it is not as cheap as it is in Japan. And another way that they make money better than America, because of how deep the culture is, they're actually more willing to pick up webcomics, more willing to buy digital than we are in America. Like I said, they've done a really fantastic job of creating a strong fan base who will just constantly be blowing money their way. And Japan does not have as big of a problem when it comes to this type of social requirements for your story or political pressure to make your story a certain way. It's just, like I said, it's just freestyling. They just do whatever they want. So many manga series are written completely organically. They have no idea how it's going to end. They just write that first chapter, like I said, and they throw it out there to see if it sticks. And there is a certain charm about that. To see someone's creative process unfold before you when you're reading something, it feels more natural in a way. I personally love writing organically. What I usually do is I write an outline and then I thumbnail. I go straight to thumbnailing. I don't like writing scripts. Scripts are boring because I can't see it before me. It's a whole different process to write a script for a comic versus just doing sketches for it. But getting back to topic. Japan, they've done a very good job creating this audience, this very wide range of audience members. They cover niche topics and fetishes, and then they cover like more generic stories, and then they cover everything in between. That's maybe a little bit off the wall, not too crazy though. And at most, they have an editor who gives them advice. And I gotta say this, I have noticed some editors make terrible decisions, give terrible advice to mangakas that make me facepalm. It's like, obviously the story should not have gone in this direction. And while Japan has been building up this audience for all these years, America has been slowly losing the audience that they've already had. Cartoons were making a lot of money for a while. Comics have been making a lot of money for a while. And even like the movies based on the comic books, of course, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, that was making a lot of money. But things are starting to turn downward, and a lot of it has to do with, the industry losing the trust of their audience. Sometimes it has to do with decisions that they make regarding, how characters are to be displayed, or what writers get control of what characters, what stories. And even in some cases, companies Japanese and writers for these stories will insult their own audience and further divide them. Japan is overall pretty good at treating their audience with respect and also being sure to give them what they want. It's not 100%, of course, but they've got a much better record with that. A lot of mistakes made here and there and everywhere, and at some point the audience isn't going to trust you to make good content anymore. Even if you do eventually make a banger, it doesn't matter because the audience isn't going to go see it. They're not going to give you a chance if you've been making nothing but stinkers for the last few years. And that's just kind of where we are now. Every time you watch something new, you take the risk of it being bad, or being generic, or being boring. And with manga, it feels a lot more like a new experience every time. So I do admire and respect a lot what Japan has built up, but I'm not sure how exactly are we going to create that same culture over here. Because it seems like everyone is just taking all the stuff from Japan because there's this mass distrust in anything made in America. Naturally, it's made the comics industry very upset. At first, they were trying to mimic what Japan was doing. They tried to mimic the anime style, mimic some plot lines in anime to try to make their own thing. We've even seen some cases of American comic writers using Japanese pen names to try to trick the audience into thinking that this book came from Japan. And now what we're seeing is they're attacking anime and manga, saying, oh, well, all this stuff is really despicable, immoral, nobody should watch or read it because sexism, racism, they go down the list, applying the same social and political expectations that they have on their own stuff, which made their stuff generic. Now they want to apply it to anime and manga because anime and manga have become so popular for that exact reason. Now this is not going to solve anything. It's just, for the most part, spiteful attacking. I can't sell my stuff, so I'm going to try to prevent these people from selling their stuff. If I go down, everyone goes down with me. That's not a mentality that I necessarily look up to. I think most writers who want to get into this field, we're gonna need to get our shit together. Start producing some bangers. Start making a name for yourselves. Build your empire, build your culture. It's a lot harder to do when you're doing it by yourself, but hopefully you'll have other people who are willing to side with you. Be off the wall, be edgy, be crazy. Do everything that the current comic industry is not doing. That is my advice. Now, some might say, oh, why should we have to do that now when we've never had to do that and comics have been extremely popular? That's not true. Comics, back in the day when they were first starting out, comics were allowed to be weird, and that was one of the best things about them. Comics were allowed to be weird, they were allowed to be silly, they were allowed to be off the wall and crazy. A couple years ago or so, I made this video, comics versus manga, where I was basically just comparing the two and the differences between how they're written and how they're formatted. And at first I thought that comics had a bigger edge on manga because they have all kinds of different art styles and they're more grounded and at times more creative. A lot of people didn't know when I was making the video, but when I was talking about that, what I really meant was old school comics. I was not at the time reading newer comics because what I like to do is I like to go back and read where this comic series began, even if that was way in the 30s or 50s, I'll still read it. But the big thing about those older comics is that they weren't afraid of being goofy. They weren't under this pressure to be super serious or to cover political topics. They weren't under all this pressure to fill out these check boxes. It was just freestyling, and I think we need more of that. So those are my thoughts on the big anime boom. If you have your own thoughts and opinions, please do leave them down below in the comments section. That's what it's there for. And hey, Ellie the Eliminator campaign, it's still going, guys. You should give it a look-see, because it is cute, and it is silly, and I like it. Link in the description. Remember to like the video if you have enjoyed. If you'd like to see more videos that coming, you gotta hit that subscribe button. Thank you for watching. I'll see you guys next time.